First of all, I've been thinking about Errol's question regarding can you fight string follow in ash, which is somewhat prone to string follow if you make a backwards bow. And I would say you could very well have an advantage because when you're working from the center of the wood out, you're working with a lot more heartwood, which is harder than the sapwood, and so it's very possible that is a good way to do it. Most likely, it depends on the size of your stave, how much heartwood you have, but heartwood is good stuff. And in this case, I decided, you can see the lines on here, I decided to go with a backwards bow, and it was mostly because of the knots. I have at both mid limbs, ugly carbuncles that I'd be dealing with, whereas on the back, knots well within the limits of the bow, even these three right here. And because of their orientation, where they're going to, I'm not going to be left with ugly fiber breakage on the sides of the bow too. It's always about the back and the belly, but the sides matter. So I definitely went with the backwards kind of a thing. Now, if you look at a lot of the actual old First Nations bows, there were many that crossed grains, and especially grain lines, growth rings, and stuff like that. And in some cases, in a lot of cases, especially those West Coast bows, which bent back upon themselves, that were sinew-backed, it was like the growth rings and grain and fibers just were not even thought about. And I am going to sinew-back this thing, so, I'm not going to worry about it. Throw it to the wind. Sometimes you have to say, do I have to go to this extra effort because of ego or whatever? It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's your craft. But sometimes you can just say, I'm not worried about it. I'm going to work this piece of wood into the shape I want, regardless of the grain and the fibers. And that's what I'm basically doing. Again, it's almost 60 inches long, which is a long, short bow. It's going to be sinew-backed. I'm not going for a 32-inch draw length. It's not going to be an 80-pound bow. It's going to be within modest means. So yeah, I can get away with it. I found the center lines, and it's nice because even though it has the wiggles in here, it was lined up. Now you need to be careful with the string method because you might get a little bump along the way that can throw you off, and it threw me off a little bit. But what I did is I have a nail in one end in which I tied my string, and then brought it down to the center of the handle, and then it brought it straight down. And I noticed that I could have had two centers, but I did it to the true center. I threw it off this way at this tip to get it, and it was minor. It probably wouldn't have mattered whatsoever, but it is what it is. Now, with a snaky bow, how can you take a cardstock form, and you see there's a taper on this end, and you can mark it, which I did with a pencil right there, and I use that because when I work it down there, I'll still have a little wiggle room when I make it a little narrower to throw it to one side or the next. But all you do is basically just take this, and I started at this end, and then just drew, and when I get to a part where I'm going to have to start making a corner, a curve, just shorter, and just literally take this thing and just steer your way down to the end. But before I finished, I thought, because it'll probably be a Deflex tip bow. You look at this Comanche bow maker. His dad was a bow maker, and his grandpa, I think it's Comanche Bows YouTube channel. And the self, no backing, Comanche's just self bows made of Osage. A lot of them had this really graceful, beautiful deflex in them. And I do not believe that that's string follow. I think they intentionally put that there to get more draw length. You could have a reflexed bow braced a certain distance and have a draw length, but if you deflex the tips, you're going to get a longer draw length. It's not what's prescribed, but it's something that works. Last note. is that if you have a recurve or deflex tips, it would really help you to make sure that the portion that's bent is in line with the center, instead of having that snaky over the recurve, because it gets squirrely and looks bad. You know, it's certainly possible if you have it going off the one side to either twist it with heat or something like that, or else kind of differential tillering where one edge is thicker than the other. And the thicker edge will want to bend less so you can actually steer if you've got a propeller twist. But I chose, because I've had the width, and you can see how it's off center here, I just traced it so that the area that's going to be deflexed is in line with everything. It's not as big of a deal when you're deflexing it. It might not even be a deal at all. I could have that tip area that's deflexed out of line. It's not as critical as if you're recurving it. Different pressures, different things at work, different geometries. But I did it anyway because I could. I had enough wood. So now the next part is working almost to my lines, because you want to have some grace. You've got this big old thick piece of wood. Then you shave it off both sides. Now you have less wood that you have to remove from the top. And I typically will remove wood from the sides. Then I'll remove it from the top. Then I'll remove it from the bottom, or that. But every time you get like a step which removes a good deal of wood, then things move faster and then you can work more precisely. It's a matter of stages. And that's pretty much all I had to say. Oh, I guess this was the end. My blue line is way off center here because I forced it to go straight. But again, I had plenty of wood to deal with. And I'm not concerned hardly at all, because you can see how many steps I have in here. It's thick here. You see a lot of heartwood and then less here. You don't see any heartwood here. So there's steps happening, but sinew backing is all.